Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of Voices for Excellence. I am your host, Dr. Michael Connor, CEO and founder of the Agile Evolutionary Group, and of course, the proud host of VFE. And today's guest is a personal favorite of mine. I have had the extraordinary opportunity to work with Dr. Causey-Bush, as well as the superintendent, Mr. Terrence Davis, in Banning Unified School District in Banning, California. But Dr. Tonia Causey-Bush is one, I like to say, the instructional experts. And when we get on, whether it be, one of our strategy sessions, or it might just be just a conversation about curriculum instruction and where we're going, when I like to say this 22nd century, it's just been absolutely phenomenal, just learning from her. So without any further ado, I would love to introduce and bring on the VFE. Yes, you can tell I am a fan. Anybody that talks curriculum and instruction with me, Dr. Causey-Bush, I'm just a fan of. So I'm a fan of your work. Like I said, working close with you and the Banning team, and just also seeing everything from afar across the country in New York. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Causey-Bush. She is the Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services for Banning Unified School District in sunny Banning, California. Dr. Causey-Bush, how are you today?
I am well. I'm very well, thank you. Amidst this heat wave that we find ourselves in the midst of here in Southern California.
Okay, don't get me started. Don't get me started. Go ahead, carry on, because I'm going to counter that.
Yeah, and I have to say, I really shouldn't complain too much because we've had a fairly mild summer compared to how most summers in Southern California start off. I don't think we began to hit triple digits yet until August. And so July, if I don't even think we hit any triple digits, at least in this area. So, but we're making up for it now. Because they say tomorrow is supposed to be the hottest day yet, and it's very hot today. So,
Ooh, well, Dr. Causey-Bush, I want to tell you this, and to my audience, this podcast recording is occurring in August, right? And California, Banning, California, about to hit triple digits. Now, Dr. Causey-Bush, I'll tell you this. I was in warm-ups and a sweatshirt waking up this morning. And yes, it only hit 68 degrees. It is definitely, I can tell you this, in Western New York, the weather is starting to turn and I am not liking it. But hey, look, you know what that means? That means the academic year has started, and I know
that
you're
is right.
right.
That is right. Things have shifted and we're officially into go mode now, and I just have to say it's very interesting because there was a time, and I'm probably aging myself, that by the time we started school, which used to be pretty much in September, it would still be a little warm, but there was a significant decline in the temperature where, you could start wearing, those sweatshirts and the cute baggy jeans and stuff, to school. And right now, not anymore, I would say, because number one, we're starting school in August. So it tends to stay a little hotter longer because we're still in the middle of summer. But it is also still taking a lot longer for the temperatures to start going down, even when fall, officially descends upon us. So it's interesting to see those differences, because it used to be you associate certain types of clothes with going back to school. And right now, it's still summer attire when students go, go back to school.
I'll tell you this, Dr. Causey-Bush, and we'll get into the interview. One of my superintendent colleagues, they started school the last week of July. And I'm like, wait. We just still in the middle of summer in July.
Dead in the middle of summer.
Did it right. They started the last week. Shout out to my people in the southern region of the United States who
And
started
the humidity.
the humidity with that. Anyways, Doc, I want you to bring the fire for this podcast because, of course, I want my audience to be able to experience firsthand your instructional acumen and expertise in the specific area, and specifically the innovative initiatives that you are leading from a curriculum instruction standpoint. But, Dr. Causey-Bush, you are known in California, right? You won a major award. Congratulations. And then you'll be able to talk a little bit about that. So everybody knows who you are from a curriculum instruction, educational service standpoint in California. But for those that do not know Dr. Causey-Bush, what song describes your leadership signature right now in what I call the AC stage of education after COVID-19?
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's a wonderful question, as I tend to oscillate between um, different songs in terms of, what kind of drives me. I mean, right now I'm going to pull out an oldie, but it is definitely one that I do rely on. And it's by Earth, Wind, and Fire. And it is called Keep Your Head to the Sky. And I can say to you, just in terms of, coming back, you know, in this after COVID phase, we find that we are faced with challenge after challenge, even to a greater degree, obviously, than before, because of all of the impacts that we're seeing with the increased need from the community, the increased needs of our students in the classrooms, their respective families. COVID really did a number on folks. And with all due respect, to those who lost their lives, I think all of us were impacted to varying degrees. We had families and students who, had to stay home, and varying home environments of things that they may have been exposed to that perhaps they may not have been exposed to as much had they been in school. And so that has put a significant strain on the schooling system and our ability to respond to those needs, which really, obviously, it impacts the academics, because it impacts, their needs and in the community. And all of that, of course, impacts the students' abilities to attend to and be engaged in the schooling process. That can be very challenging if you are presented with some, let me just say, not so optimal challenges at home. And our job is to receive those kids with love and do our best to create an environment for them to thrive. And that carries a lot of weight. And it carries a lot of weight for our teachers who are on the front lines. It carries a lot of weight for us at central office to support our principals, who are then supporting their staff, who are supporting those students. And so on that song, Keep Your Head to the Sky, it pours into me because I know, you know what? There's always going to be a rainbow for us to look towards. And we have to keep our head to the sky, because if we don't, then that's when we begin to let our students down. If they see that we've lost hope, that's not good for them. And so that is my mantra. And you know what? That's I'll gladly take that. I am one of those people who typically look at the glass as being half full as opposed to half empty. And that's who I am. That's my core.
Absolutely. And Dr. Causey-Bush, Earth, Wind, and Fire, all time great, all time great. You brought out the all time great, but I think your district and independent mantra of keep your head to the sky, I think that is more, and this is subjective as I state this. I think that this is such a critical mantra right now in this current state of education, including how we're moving the model in education too, because one of your sentiments that you highlighted, and I was writing down pretty much everything that you say in Dr. Causey-Bush, was that there were students that were impacted in COVID-19. And yes, I know we're 6 academic years away. Seems like yesterday, but 6 academic years. And when we think about students that are being impacted or responding to the needs of the students, to my audience, before we started recording the podcast, right? And Dr. Causey-Bush so eloquently put this, is that our kindergarten students now, right, that have matriculated into the PK-12 continuum, if we remember, they were babies, 1 to 2 years old during COVID. So now measuring what is the true impact lasting impact that are coming into our schools. And I think, as you stated, we have to be more intentional to be responsive to the needs. I remember this was when Dr. Pedro Noguera was at NYU. And of course, now we know he's at the University of Southern California. This, I believe, Dr. Causey-Bush, this was over 11, 12 years ago. And I remember this as if Dr. Noguera stated it yesterday. He stated that if a student's basic needs are not met, they're not going to learn. You said you in the way you said that. Now in the AC stage of education, I think there has to be a much more intentionality, of course, to the reauthorization of the model, but how are we addressing the systemic needs of our students? Because not only are they coming in with some lasting impact from COVID-19 that are matriculating into the PK-12 continuum. I think that now we have to be more attentive of the learner attributes, generation alpha and beta, and how they've been impacted by COVID, and what are we seeing in our systems to align it. But what do we have to do, Dr. Causey-Bush? We have to keep our head to the
We
sky.
absolutely must. And we absolutely must, and create an environment. In fact, that is part of our whole, what I call our educational services foundation, is how do we have an acronym that's called the chief. And it's very simple. We have to have assessments. We always need to know where our students are. Just like, with our weight, my weight, which I used to not have a scale, but what can I say? I now have a scale in my 50s, but I need to be aware. And so we have to have some measures, right? And the C, what are we using? What kind of curriculum, what kind of tools are we using with our students? Are we guaranteeing that they have a viable curriculum? What are we guaranteeing to them? Right? And then of course, as the H is, what kinds of habits and mindsets do we want to help inculcate in them? How are we approaching them? What kinds of habits do we as the educators have, right? And then, the I, which is right in the center, is the instruction, first best instruction. And if we put our efforts into that, we minimize the likelihood that they may need interventions as they matriculate through the grades, right? And then E, of course, is our efficacy. To what extent do we believe that individually and collectively we can have an impact on the lives of students? Because if we don't have that, if we don't believe it, it won't happen, right? And then the value, the V that we place on our principals as instructional leaders. That's been a huge shift for us in terms of helping to develop our principals as those instructional leaders right there on the front lines, seeing the day-to-day needs, increasing needs of our students. And then finally, the other E, the environment. And I can't stress that enough, because we have enough challenges already just in terms of our general jobs of being educators. But in spite of that, what kind of environment are we providing for students to thrive, right? How are we tilling our own soil, if you will, the soil of the classrooms, the soil of the district? Are we, putting nutrients in that soil so that our students can thrive? And that also means putting nutrients into our staff, because they have lives too. All of us were impacted to various degrees as a result of COVID. And irrespective of COVID, though, what are we doing to make sure we are pouring into ourselves so that we create an environment for students to thrive and for our staff, obviously, to thrive? And that is our foundation. We very important, that environment.
Tell you this, Dr. Causey-Bush, and to my audience, we use this as a professional learning tool, a asynchronous tool, so that they can be able to go back, expand upon different ideas, sentiments that our guest present. And I think the acronym that you presented to my audience, if you surgically unthread that by each of the individual letters, we're going to go back to reading instruction. You can implement it like a mnemonic device and be able to scaffold outputs for a 22nd century model with that. Absolutely. Dr. Causey-Bush, well stated. Now, as we talk about this 22nd century model, I know firsthand, Dr. Causey-Bush, you are leading some innovative instructional initiatives in banning, specifically around the portrait of a graduate. And I know personally how you and your team was systemically aligning specific indicators, designing indicators around the portrait of a graduate, where they're going to have 22nd century attributes, preparing your students for the future, being future driven. And I love how you stated in your last answer, supporting your principals, ensuring that they are instructional leaders. So when we think about this, the portrait of a graduate work that Banning is underscoring, intentionally looking at curriculum and instruction, as you stated, measurements, assessments in this portrait of a graduate lens, leading to strategic operating plan implementation. Can you unpack the work that is moving students to be 22nd century ready in banning when they graduate? And what strategies, Dr. Causey-Bush, are you employing to guide this systematic transformation in BUSD?
Absolutely. We are very, very proud. We've been working, I would say, the last 2.5 years on what is called our banning portrait of a learner, which we're very excited about. And I'll just kind of give a little background on this. We began working with the National Center on Education and the Economy, NCEE, who came out and worked with the cross section of community partners, including some of our board members, site administrators, teachers, classified staff, and the like, and obviously district office administrators. And really, we just talked about what is the research saying out there in terms of what makes an effective school environment, right? Because a school environment, that's a very loaded word. The school environment is its own ecosystem. And so what are some different elements of ecosystems that are where different countries, if you will, are seeing significant growth and student achievement? Mind you, it doesn't mean that we replicate what another country is doing because our environment is different, but there are many things we can learn. And some of those things include really looking at, what are we doing? What are our level of expectations for students? How much support are we providing to our teachers, right? How are we structuring our day, the academic day, for students? How are we looking at model day schedules, right? Just some very basic elements. And so after, kind of going through a lot of that research and thinking about our unique community here in Banning, we came up with what we call 7 competencies, 7 different levels of priorities. And again, this was a group effort. This was not, one individual. This was a collective effort from the entire team who participated on this committee. And there was a lot of conversation and going back and forth and revising and, restating, and a lot of heated conversations that were necessary in order to give birth to these competencies. And then from those 7, we eventually consolidated those 7 down to 5 and currently to 4. And very, very proud of that because we got to, from those 4 competencies, community responsibility and leadership as a priority for our banning students, right? We have innovation and creativity because we know when we think about the context of the banning community and what we want our students to exit with, what kinds of skills we want them to exit with when they leave, those were the things that rose to the top. We also have communication and collaboration. To what extent do we have students who are going to be able to interact with others, right? And to have a team spirit of collaboration. And then finally, the critical and analytical thinking. And you know what? I'll say this, whether student ops to go to college when they leave Banning or go directly into the workforce, they're going to need all four of these competencies. They're going to need to be critical and analytical thinkers. They're going to need to be innovative as we continue to move into, right, this 22nd century and thinking about all the jobs that don't yet even exist, as well as all the jobs that will not exist in the future. And how nimble will our students be in that kind of environment? And then from there, we came up, got those four competencies. The next level is what we call the progressions, because it's great to have those four competencies. That is the backbone of our Banning portrait of a learner. But what does that mean for each grade span? What does it mean for a kindergartner? What does it mean for a student who's a sixth grader or a student who's in the 11th grade? In terms of where they are, how are they measuring themselves? And so the work of the learning progressions was the next step. And our team did an absolutely outstanding job, primarily our teachers, of saying, hey, for community responsibility and leadership, this is what we're expecting from kindergarten students, for second grade students, for middle school students. And this is what it would look like maybe from a level 1 on a continuum to maybe a level 5 in terms of being able to measure growth within that particular element versus growth across the grade spans. And so that is where we are right now, is refining those learning progressions. And we are actually going to be reconvening to kind of bring all of that together as we finalize and put a nice ribbon, if you will, on that portrait of a learner. And more importantly, I will just wrap it up with this, is that we are creating a system that will outlast all of us. We want people who come in 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, long after we're gone, to pick up on that work and continue to adjust it and revise it so that it's applicable to the time and the culture.
And Dr. Causey-Bush, what you elaborated on, systems that will outlast us, I like to say that is this level of, we always say that you have to have succession planning, and we always have succession planning in the context of personnel, right? When we see whether it be the associate superintendent, deputy superintendent, that seamlessly move into that superintendent role, right? And that superintendent was preparing him or her for the superintendency. That's that succession planning. But I always say this in an outlier manner, that we have to have succession planning in the context of systems design, right? That once we matriculate out of that learning organization or that LEA, the next tier of leaders will be able to sustain and pick up the work from their predecessors. And I always say that, we have a habit of planning for succession planning at the personnel level, but we need to plan that at the systems level. And that is exactly what you are doing through Banning's portrait of a learner. And you and I, Dr. Causey-Bush, have had many conversations in the context of, and to my audience, the 22nd century education model. And when we talk about that with the portrait of a system, theory of action is we have to align the structures and the systems in order for competencies indicators within our portrait of a learner, portrait of graduate, in order for that to be realized, to prepare our students for, as you said, jobs that we don't know about, and what people fail to talk about, Dr. Causey-Bush, is jobs that are going to be eliminated. How are we now going to balance that equilibrium with AI? And I'm glad that you said each of those sessions, moving from 7 competencies to 4 competencies, was rigorous. There was rigor in the context of personal, intrinsic insight into that dynamic conversation that led to this very multi-tenant, multi-dimensional 4 competencies, or the 4 competencies within your portrait of a learner. To my audience, how Dr. Causey-Bush intentionally added all voices, went through rigorous discussions where everybody didn't agree with each other, which is great. We need more of that in education, to come out with these multidimensional competencies that now is going to be realized through every single thread and aspect of the operating model. Very intentional, Dr. Causey-Bush. Love that. But I want to provide an extension question, because you elaborated on the 4 competencies that are going to be embedded within Banning's portrait of a learner. You started to talk about, with regards, how we're preparing Generation Alpha and Generation Beta for that 22nd century. I like to say that system succession, where leaders are going to build on the legacy work that you and Mr. Davis have started, teachers, that community. But what does this look like in the context of implementation from 2 parallels: leadership and classroom instruction? I'm only limited to there. I'm not going broad systems. You know me, Dr. Causey-Bush, but 2 parallels. How does these competencies, how does that reflect in leadership? You talked about instructional leadership. You talked about supporting principals. What does that look like from a leadership lens? And then, of course, our most important practitioners, I always say the teachers, because they're the first people that are touching our babies.
I will definitely begin from the leadership lens, and that begins, of course, from our superintendent, who has laid out what our focus should be. We ourselves have to make sure that we are prepared to do this work. And how do we prepare ourselves to do this work? We have to pour into ourselves so that we can be our best selves and show up. But more importantly, what kinds of tools are we accessing to improve our own personal leadership? And again, what are we doing to pour into ourselves in terms of things that we're reading? And just a few quick things is, which are very, very basic, is when we say we're going to do something, are we following through with that, with what we said we're going to do? Just as an example. And that is really a self-check on our own selves in terms of looking at ourselves as a leader, as a model, right? And so really making sure that, we are putting ourselves out there, being visible, being reliable, right? Being a resource to be able to support our sites, and following through with things. And I'm saying these very basic things because they really combine to create a person who has credibility. And as a leader, those two are synonymous. You have to be credible. You have to make sure that you are on top of yourself, that you know your craft, that you are someone who owns up, because none of us are perfect, that you're owning up to the things that you said you're going to do. We're walking our talk. If this is what we said we're going to do, then we're actually doing that. And again, very basic, but these things are the building blocks of being a leader. Making sure that we have empathy and compassion. And those are extremely important, because this work, being in this field, being in education, if we don't have those attributes, if we're not able to approach everything we do from that perspective, with the great need that exists in our schools and our communities, it is going to impede us from doing the great work that we're setting out to do. And so a lot of that leadership development really begins inside of us, and making the commitment that we are going to do this as a team made up of all of the various personalities that don't have to agree. We shouldn't agree because we have so many beautiful perspectives that need to be considered. But we do need to be in alignment with one another. We do need to be focused. We do need to be on the same page in terms of being laser focused on what we're setting out to do to move the academic growth and development of our students forward. And so the leadership development, that is continual. And you heard me, of course, mention wanting our superintendent's priority of helping to build the instructional leadership capacity of our principals. That is one aspect of being a leader, is the instructional piece. And so just how are we making sure that we know the curriculum and what is being asked of students? Are we digging into the standards? Are we supporting our teachers and giving them time to dig into the essential standards and the flexibility to be able to say, hey, we need to move some of these standards in this textbook, which is a great tool, but when we create our scope and sequence, we may want to focus on these standards in September. We're going to move these standards to December and these standards to March, not because we're trying to teach to a test, but because we want to set students up to be successful and looking at what makes the most sense for how students learn. And so that brings up a whole nother brand new piece as an instructional leader, is the focus on data. And our superintendent has made that a priority in terms of being very astute at knowing our data and looking at the data. Because if we're not looking at the data, how do we know what it is that our students need to grow in? And that begins obviously at the classroom level and district-wide as we look at trends. But more importantly, when we're giving whatever kind of assessment it is, if we're looking at local assessments, for us, those local assessments were, we had some common assessments that we're using and that we're still using. We have diagnostic assessments we're using. And then we also have some of the state formative assessments, which are actually the interim assessment blocks. All this data, but if we don't know what it's saying, then how can we make any adjustments instructionally if we are not looking at what areas of growth our students need to make? And I will say this in terms of looking at our most recent data preliminarily, we're very proud that we have continued to make growth on our state assessments preliminarily. And we're very proud of that. It has been very consistent. And in fact, as we continue to dig into the data, we already know at this point what areas that we need to dig deeper into, which areas that students not experience growth in, and how are we responding instructionally to that? Are we providing students with, a clear idea, even in our learning objectives, of what we're expecting for them to do, all the way down to the most granular level of lesson planning? And so all of these big ideas and concepts that merge into literally the creation of an instructional leader and what we say we're going to focus on. And I will also push it a little further that our principals, absolutely, they're the instructional leaders of the school, but the classroom teacher, in terms of the power that they possess in being the instructional leader in their classroom, because you're driving that instruction. They are right there on the front lines. And how can we support them and give them the tools they need and to empower them and building their selves as leaders and then collaborating with their peers and their PLCs? extremely important because we can't do this work by ourselves on an island. We have to be able to work with one another and look at, what someone else may have had a success in that we can now learn from and bring to scale, perhaps, that all students can benefit from.
Absolutely. And Dr. Causey-Bush, amazing points that you have made. I think one that resonated with me, obviously, your the full depth and breadth of your answer. But what I love is you're bringing a culture where everybody is an instructional leader. You stated, Dr. Causey-Bush, and I'm gonna quote you when you say this, or when I say this. Our teachers should be the instructional leader in the classroom. Wow. Because when I look at that vertical articulation, instructional leadership at the site-based level, where the instructional leader of that building is the principal, but add in that dimension of leadership, our teachers are the instructional leaders in their classroom. I really like that because to my audience, what Dr. Causey-Bush captured within that answer around the alignment of leadership practices and classroom instruction, it goes back to vision and capacity, right? The articulation of the vision of where we're going, i.e., the four competencies within the banning portrait of a learner. And then now, when we look at alignment, when we look at being focused, right? Focus. Whenever I hear the word focus, I always reference smokers' work. And then instructional leadership, right? And you gave an example of unpacking the standards, but the unpacking of the standards, there is this alignment because the guideposts are the competencies that are embedded within the portrait of a learner, looking at data, trends, and obviously I can go on and on about, data analysis, business intelligence, and going really deep with the data, but it captures two mega themes around vision and capacity. And to my audience, when we think about that vision and capacity being intentional, as Dr. Causey-Bush stated, to empower our teachers with tools and the necessary capabilities to be instructional leaders in their classrooms. Dr. Causey-Bush, to be honest with you, your exponential growth is expected with that strategy, and is
That is what are positioning ourselves for.
you're evident now exponentially based off of your responses in this podcast. I can't wait to next summer. Dr. Causey-Bush, where we at next summer? It's 110 degrees, but I'm jumping for joy because we have 45% growth. I would not be shocked, Dr. Causey-Bush, but I want to get in another topic now. And I'll tell you this, right? And I'm going to contact you over the fall because I got to know what these grade level progressions are in the context of how you're measuring that with your portrait of the learner. I want to learn from you from that, but that's a different topic on its own. You hold me to it, and I'm saying it. I'm saying it on VFA because you can't turn me down and say, I don't got time for you, Mike, for the progressions. But anyway, Doc, right? There's phrases within my 22nd century education model like disruptive forces can be theoretical to people, can be nerve wracking when we think about this disruptive force in education, right? And then also, I think you have intentionally outlined this phrase that's commonly used in education now in the AC stage of education, which is this human centered design, right? But when I think about disruptive forces and human centered design concepts, they have to be these interface continuous improvement mechanisms. Now, from this context of disruptive forces, Dr. Causey-Bush, be it technical, be it technological, be it pedagogical, systems level, instructional leaders in our classrooms to our practitioners, right? How is Banning Unified innovating to prescribe this 22nd century model? I know it's being underscored with the critical work of your portrait of a learner, but what else are you prescribing for this 22nd century model?
Wow, that's a very powerful question because I think our problem is we have access to so much, and how do we pull in what is going to give us right now exactly what we need? And more importantly, how do we know to pull which resource? Because there are abundance. And obviously artificial intelligence is taking over. Like we are, I mean, I could only imagine, right? When you purchase a computer or TV, the moment you buy it or a car, it's already outdated. And so that's due to the exponential growth, right? And so you can just only imagine in terms of the exponential growth that we're not even aware of that's going to take place, I don't know, over the next months, weeks, years, who knows? But how do we how do we embrace that and not be afraid of it? And so to me, that is a very radical thinking process because there are a lot of fears, and I will be one of them, just being very transparent. Like, well, how do we pull in, you know, AI, into the classroom? Because, we have to be careful because, we don't want students, submitting, papers that they didn't write or, what if they didn't, that's going to take away from their critical thinking. And that's not where the energy should be focused. The energy should be focused on how can we pull it in and use it as a tool to help cultivate the critical and thinking skills, to help students to collaborate and communicate. What about using it in a way that's going to strengthen those kinds of skills? By using it as a tool, something to embrace and to make sure that our students have, of course, I don't know, technological manners, if you will, in terms of using it ethically, and in terms of being fair and respectable, all of that. Those are the things that we have control over in terms of teaching to students what is a respectable way to use it. But we are doing them a disservice if we don't embrace and guide them in terms of how to use it. And I think for us, we're at the, still at the baby stages of, even in terms of trying to, you know, put together a model, a district-wide model of expectations of how we can embrace and use and have expectations of AI across the district. So that once again, we are aligned. And I will continue to bring up that term because we have to be aligned in what we're doing so that we're all on the same page. And so if we do have students, let's just say they're in a, I don't know, whatever grade level classroom, and they're using an AI tool to help them think of a prompt, well, that doesn't take away their ability to critically think because they use the tool because they're still going to be engaged in conversations where they do have to think about, oh, well, what is your perspective on this? They're still going to have to come up with critiques. And let's say this, let's say they use AI to say, oh, whatever, AI, give me a list of pros and cons of this topic. Okay, well, in their conversations with their team, they can have conversations about, well, why does this why would that not work? This is what AI says, but let's think of reasons why it would not. And so to me, it's all about how we create the learning experiences for students using this tool. It doesn't mean that it's replacing thinking. It's how we're using it. I'm very passionate about that because it's here. We cannot be afraid of it. We have to learn how to pull it in and have it work, use it as a tool to work with us. That is a very, in my opinion, very radical way of thinking, which is, why it's just very important when we think about the future of our students. How are we making sure that they are going to be prepared? Because this is going to be the world. We're at the precipice of it when you think about it. And so the learner profile and those four competencies become even more important because they become a lens for everything. The communication is still a lens, the collaboration It's the lens, the critical thinking. That's it's of everything that we do.
Dr. Causey-Bush, to my audience, that's an answer to playback. I I was sitting here just listening to a variety of different micro strategies, right? Micro strategies that I think can be intentionally assessed and examined through this continuous improvement lens with these two parallels of these disruptive forces in human-centered design. And you elaborated on a very important topic, which is AI. I'm very passionate about AI integration into the operating model, be a part of the transformation. And Dr. Causey-Bush, you can't put it any better as you stated, right? We have to really embrace, and I want to level set with that, Dr. Causey-Bush, we have to embrace AI. And not for the fact of there are various economic dimensions and economic forces and apparatuses that are changing around us, but just on the pure objective metric of the core attributes of our students today, who are Generation Z, who is matriculating out of the PK-12 continuum this year, 25, 26, a class of 26. And then we're going to have Gen A'ers. Then we have I like to call our COVID babies entering kindergarten or in kindergarten. Congratulations to this year's the first year. They will be graduating and you'll get to my point. They'll be graduating 2038, but get to my point. And then we have Generation Beta, who was born January 1st, 2025. With that stated, Dr. Causey-Bush, they are Generation Alpha is considered the generative natives, and Generation Beta are considered the quantum natives. Now, when you just think about it, generative natives and quantum natives, we have to be able to embrace AI because these disruptive forces are a part of their naturalized economic interactions or the trends that they engage in on a daily basis. So with that stated, Dr. Causey-Bush, we have to be able to bring in various dimensions and elements of artificial intelligence into the actual operating model. Now, when we think about our kindergartners who are graduating in 2038, and you even stated in your answer, Dr. Causey-Bush, which was so well stated, we don't know what that future is going to look like with AI. It's changing by, you said, the days and hours, but by 2038, Dr. Causey-Bush, if you think about it, superintelligence would be a part of our everyday model, meaning that these models can be able to self-correct themselves. I don't want to get into the technicalities of it, but that's scary. That's scary. By by 2038, we're looking at probably fully developed agentic AI. Agentic AI will probably be fully developed, which I'm inferring that, as we continuously with these models with AI, I'm hesitant to say this as a disruptor, and you heard me pause intentionally, that is where we can see where the traditional brick and mortar of school will be disrupted by it. So, and as you stated, we are at the infancy stages of AI. So when I think about superintelligence, agentic AI, when I think about autonomous machine learning platforms, and this is what our kids are naturally engaging in an everyday basis. Dr. Causey-Bush, your answer is right on the head. We can't keep kicking the can down the road with AI, especially Generation Alpha, Beta, and I like to say our COVID babies are now in kindergarten. So you are absolutely right when we talk about human-centered design, as Banning has done it with their portrait of a learner, and these disruptive forces within the economy that we have to pay attention to. I think we need to have I know we're talking about AI, but as we start feeling more comfortable with AI, I'm afraid that we're super intelligence is going to be here and continuously disrupting the model even more. I, so you're right, Dr. Causey-Bush. The E word is so important. We have to embrace it, but I want to go back to another E word you stated. We have to embrace it, but our leaders, we have to have a level of empathy as we're unpacking and scaffolding AI into our operating and learning models. But Dr. Causey-Bush, we can go in depth with that. But I want for my leaders, because this has been a great conversation. You've went through this rigorous process to design the Banning's portrait of a learner. You talked about instructional leadership at all tiers, including teachers being the instructional leaders of their classrooms. I'm going to use that and just that whole panoramic view of AI and what we need to do to move towards that. But in this paradigm of ideation and iteration, Dr. Causey-Bush, what advice you have been a mainstay in education. You have been a long seasoned tenured educator in this field, have impacted many lives, have mentored many leaders across the spectrum. What advice would you give my audience who is a leader trying to ensure innovation is sustainable, as you talked about, rather than just being temporary?
This is my 32nd year, maybe it's the 33rd year, who's counting, in education. And I will tell you, every year that I'm here in this field, which is a blessing, I come away with many things that I did not know. And we have to always be open to learning, to looking at things from varied perspectives. We cannot close ourselves off and say, oh, this is it. This is the end all be all, because that is not reality. We continue to grow and evolve as much as the needs of our students continue to grow and evolve. And if we are not growing and evolving and humbling ourselves enough to say, hey, I need to take a step back and do some research here, make sure that I am looking at all of these different factors and think of a different way to approach whatever issue or concern, because what worked in 1995 may not necessarily be what's going to work here in 2025, because we have many different factors and environmental impacts. So I'm going to say, first and foremost, always be a learner, always study the environment and see what is going on. Be a student, be an observer, because I guarantee you these issues that we are experiencing today, I don't know what they're going to be 1 year from now, 5, 10 years from now. There'll be some variation of it. At the core of it, of course, is always going to be um, some kind of human need, obviously, but that's going to evolve and shift, as we've seen it evolve and shift here in the post AC after COVID era. And I'm very firm on that. Think about things, years ago, even in terms of how we approach literacy. When I came into education, it was very strong, whole language. In California, we had the California Literacy Project, which was, we need to make sure that students have a love for reading, and let's infuse them with books, and which is beautiful, but you can't throw out phonics. It has to be a balanced approach, and we learn that lesson because, of course, what are we saying right now? Balanced literacy. It's not all or nothing, it's all of that in balance. And so we have to be mindful of the past and learning from those kinds of lessons to help position ourselves to be prepared for the future. Very, very important. So humility, constantly learning, being a perpetual student, if you will, of the profession. We owe that to our students. We can't bring to the table strategies and tactics that worked in a different era and expect those to work right now. Granted, there may be some things, I understand, but for the most part, we always have to be ready to pivot, to be flexible. We cannot be efficient in this profession if we are not flexible and willing to pivot.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I do want to stress that very much. We have to be flexible for the sake of our students. If we are approaching something and we find that it is not working, we have every right to stop and pivot because students' lives are on the line. And
Absolutely.
why are we wasting resources and time and our efforts in that?
And Dr. Causey-Bush, you have one of the best one-liners I have seen so far on VFE. That is the second one-liner within your answer I'm going to take. One is instructional leaders in the classroom. Absolutely love that. And this second one-liner, we have to be a perpetual student of the profession. And the advice that you gave to my audience, so straightforward, albeit moving. Humility, but within that humility dynamic, you have to be a student, be an observer, and be a learner, a perpetual student of the profession. There's no better advice than that, Dr. Causey-Bush. So, good sister, last question. Okay, lad, you made it through VFE, you made it through the rigor. You know what? And I said this a few times on a couple of my episodes. A few of my superintendent colleagues who are close to me, they would call me up afterwards and they would be like, Mike, man, this was harder than a superintendent interview, round three. But this is going to be round three of the interview process, Dr. Causey-Bush. And I'm only going to limit you to 3 words. You only 3 words. Now, nobody ever listens to me, right? So they just go on, their own diatribe and a tangent. But I try, I attempt. It's a good effort, right? So it's a good effort. But Dr. Dr. Causey-Bush, what 3 words for this final question do you want our audience to leave with regarding leadership for impact? Here's a one-liner, right? Leadership for impact in the AC stage of education.
So I'm absolutely going to say flexibility. I live by that. And I mean, it's very simple. If we are not, then we will break.
Mm.
And that is just the honest truth. I'm also going to say to be credible. And that goes back again to being a constant learner. We spend a lot of time, that we pour into um, our work. And so when we speak, we need to make sure that the things that we're sharing, that we are being credible in those things because we don't have a lot of time and we are always rushing to get information out. So to be credible. And then the last word, which you probably already know, is to remain humble because at any given point, if I ever think that I know everything, then I am no longer of use because I have now defeated my own purpose in being in this profession. Because I don't, and the fact is, none of us do. But we will always need to make sure we are positioning ourselves to learn, to grow, and to be flexible enough to pivot when the time is right. And that to me is how you can get to having a sense of longevity by being mindful of those concepts.
Absolutely. And Dr. Causey-Bush, you definitely can talk about longevity. We need to be able to emulate your practices. 33 years in education is absolutely an accomplishment and a legacy left behind. But the 3 words that you identified, which I just absolutely love, especially the third one, flexibility, being credible, and of course, Dr. Causey-Bush, being humble. Dr. Causey-Bush, thank you for coming on VFE. As I stated at the outset, it's just been an absolute honor, not just to have you on just VFE, but to work with you, Mr. Davis, as well as the practitioners, the leaders, and stakeholders of Manning Unified School District. You are moving in a trajectory not only for 22nd century readiness, 22nd century being prepared for that, but you're moving kids in a direction that I think that all learning organizations must underscore. So thank you for sharing your knowledge on VFE, being a part of our family, Dr. Causey-Bush. And I told you I'm going to call you because again we gotta have that discussion around progress. I'm perseverating over
Absolutely.
it. Progressions with the portrait of a learner, but thank you, Dr. Causey-Bush, for coming on. And oh, and I forgot, how if my audience want to be able to get in contact with you? See, I got so enamored with the progressions, I forgot. What is your contact information if my audience want to reach out to you?
Absolutely. And you can find my information, go on the Banning Unified School District's website, and you can pull me up there. And my email address, for those of you who would like to reach out to me, it is literally my first initial, which is T, and my last name, CAUSEYBUSH, at banning.k12.ca.us.
Thank you, Dr. Causey-Bush. And a lot of people that are part of my audience, they do contact you. So if you see weird emails coming in with some questions, like, okay, question 3, you went, can you go a little deeper than that? That's from the VFE family. But again, thank you, Dr. Causey-Bush, for your time. I hope it don't get too hot as I'm about to put my sweatshirt on over here because it's getting a little chilly and it's raining. But again, thank you for everything that you do for kids. Thank you for everything that you do for your community.
Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you.
Absolutely. And on that note, onward and upward, everybody. Have a great evening.